Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the World Discord podcast. Is this our first or our second one of the new year, Joel?
It's our first real one of the new year. We did that
Okay,
fake one before.
yeah, exactly. We had the little one early
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Today, we're going to talk about a country that very few people know about, but it's been back in the news lately, South Korea. We often hear about its neighbor to the north, North Korea, and that's in the U.S. news a lot. South Korea, frankly, most of us probably know it better from MASH and from the time of the
Yeah.
Korean War than anything else, and we really don't hear a whole lot about it. South Korea to me is a fascinating country because of the changes since the Korean War. It went through a series of autocratic governments, but those governments are what have often been called developmental governments. And they really focused on developing the country. Unlike a lot of countries, South Korea focused on education, focused on economic development, and went from one of the poorest countries in the world in the 50s at the end of the Korean War to a very wealthy country. And they went from a country that had a poorly educated population to a country with a much better educated population. They developed a middle class. And as they did that, those people pushed for democracy. And what we're seeing now is South Korea is going through a crisis of democracy, as many countries are, but theirs has come to a head in the last few weeks with the president going through an impeachment after trying to take autocratic power and now potentially being permanently barred from office. So I'm just going to leave it at that and turn it over to Joel to introduce our guest, and we'll go from there.
Thanks so much, Brian. We are really fortunate to have with us Professor Ji Yeon Hong from University of Michigan, Associate Professor of Political Science, and if I get it right, the Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Politics. So thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a busy time, beginning of semester. So we really value your participation. And I'd like to say that um, for reasons I've never really known, somehow the student protests in the 1980s, the first set of which brought pretty unspeakable massacres and then later still quite violent, captivated me when I was in high school and then in college. And I think really helped to sort of give me the kick towards becoming a political scientist myself. Um, and I remember, in particular, even as a child, being struck by the attacks on journalists during those crackdowns, in particular, and that might have to do with the fact that my father represented newspapers in his law practice, but really I can't put my finger on it. But the events of the last few weeks have really opened my eyes and seem to present a stark contrast to what's been going on here with our own impeached and convicted president, and our own political violence when he tried to steal an election 4 years ago. And now he's returning to office. So the contrast really stands out to me, and I'm really excited to learn more. Um, I know this is your expertise. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief sort of political history about that move from dictatorship to democracy in South Korea, and kind of how that played out, and and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Thank you, Brian and Joel, for inviting me to this podcast. I was very excited to be able to join this. Because Brian, you mentioned Korean War. So just before the Korean War was trusteeship between the United States and USSR for the North Korea and South Korea, and um, under that trusteeship, there was a separate government established in 1948. So that was South Korean government, and then North Korean government was established, and then war. So initially, the first constitution of Korea was South Korea
Mm.
um, was very leaning toward to democracy. It wasn't perfect, of course, as a new nation, new country, but it was definitely more democratic. But toward getting South Korea going into the war, the constitution went through several amendments, some of which was not even constitutional,
Hmm.
procedurally problematic, but it became gradually autocratic. So that explains first 12 years of dictatorship by Syngman Lee. And then there was a revolution by students. So this marked as a sort of major first student-led movement for democracy in South Korea, which led to very brief Second Republic, which was democratic. But it didn't last even a year. And then there was a coup d'état by General Park Chung-hee, who became the dictator for 18 years. And then he had two republic, Third Republic and Fourth Republic, because he had an auto coup in 1972, which put in terms of constitution, in terms of institution, that was the darkest period for Korean
Yeah.
democracy. So it was very rigid, strict dictatorship from 1972 to 1979. And then, as you might know, he was assassinated by his security guard, basically, who has been his closest friend and also ally in all his political um, actions and decisions that far. There was an internal split into those two, and then there was assassination. At that time, there was hope among Korean citizens and opposition party for democracy. And then that was brutally
Mhm.
squashed by another coup by Chun Doo-hwan, who is the third and the last dictator of the country. And then that he there were a lot of pushback against that coup or further extension of dictatorship. And then that's what you described as massacre, which happened in a city called Gwangju, which is in southwest part of the country. And then 7 more years of dictatorship.
Yeah.
Toward the end of so when Gwangju massacre happened, I was too young to remember anything. But my mom is actually from Gwangju,
Uh-huh.
and she said, and also other people told me that it wasn't what happened was not known because all the communications were cut.
Right.
There was no internet, no social media at the time, and journalists were either blocked, but somehow this is described in a movie called A Taxi Driver as well.
Yeah.
Somehow a
Yep.
German journalist filmed a large chunk of it, and then there is, the word spreading through
Yeah.
people what happened there. So by as time goes by, the student movement was very strongly motivated by what happened in Gwangju as
Hmm.
well.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that sort of exploded in 1987, which was initially promised to have a direct election, the year that Chun Doo-hwan promised to have a direct election for the next term.
So it
So
was a
that was,
long and sounds like a long and painful move to
Yeah.
democracy, but it was a move to democracy.
yes,
Right.
yes. And yet it wasn't it wasn't one side. There was definitely protest and everything, but there were negotiations
Hmm.
between the incumbent and the opposition. So that's how the incumbent party or authoritarian successor party, as we put today's term, was one of the contender in the first democratic presidential election.
Hmm.
And then because the opposition major candidates couldn't unite as one party, the incumbent successor, the authoritarian successor candidate, won the first democratic presidential election.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the first president, democratic president of South Korea, No Tae-woo, who has been
Mhm.
close ally to Chun Doo-hwan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
can you put the current, like, what has tripped up, like what's behind the troubles now? Why did the now imprisoned former president
Mhm.
impose martial law? What was going on that brought about this political crisis?
Sure. I think Korean democracy has been consolidated. I mean,
Yeah.
no country has absolutely smooth politics. So I think there was sometimes the opposition. Initially, I think the Conservative Party, which is also authoritarian successor party, has been winning most of the elections. And
Mm,
then that changed with the first with the economic crisis in 1997. That was the first the turnover in terms of governing ruling party, and had the first progressive president. And then later, as time goes by, the Conservative Party losing sometimes lose the National Assembly with the parliamentary election as well. So it seems like going well. Up until I would say, although there were signs of polarization, but it wasn't as dramatic or drastic until 2017. 2016, 2017, what happened was there was a massive scandal surrounding the former president Park Geun-hye, who is also first daughter of Park Chung-hee, the 18-year
mm,
dictator, or a political figure who's also touted as developmental founding father
yeah.
of South Korean economy. Her term ended very tragically for her and the Conservative Party because she was impeached for political scandal, and that was not great. That was not that very ugly scandal, and the next election was won by the Progressive Party. And then this president won the next election, which is also the most recent presidential election, as the Conservative Party candidate. Um, but
Mm.
ironically, he was the prosecutor who actually put Park
Huh.
Geun-hye to jail.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So
You know,
somehow Conservative Party see him as a rescuer of the party, and then put him as the candidate, as a strong man of principle,
Mm,
who even put the president, and then
yeah.
also very prominent former president daughter into prison because he was such a man of principle.
Mm,
So that was sort of what Conservative Party and the supporters were thinking when they put him as the candidate. The problem with him is he was not experienced politician, and
oh,
he was indeed man of principle, but some of his principles were very ideologically driven. So
uh,
the minute he became the president, a lot of people were puzzled why he kept repeating the language of 50s and 60s, like
oh.
North Korean forces or anti-state forces. Those, some of the language used by him was like never heard, especially for younger generation, never heard since democratization, especially in mainstream politics. But somehow he was very much into it, and then there were increasing signals that that he is actually not like healthy conservative. He was actually very leaning toward far right.
Hmm.
Interesting. Let's jump back in history. We may end up going back and forth a little bit here. I
Sure.
mentioned it at the beginning, and you mentioned the autocrat who was the first developmental president. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's often called the Korean miracle as one of the Asian economies that was actually able to develop a strong economy while most poor countries have been stuck in poverty and haven't been able to get out of it? What
Mhm.
did the Korean government do differently that led to the success? And we don't often
Mhm.
see autocrats who help their country instead of
Yeah.
stuffing their own pockets. So,
Mhm.
if you can talk a little bit about what went into that.
Sure. I think we can start from late 50s when Syngman Lee government basically collapsed. That's also when US government cut the aid amount to South Korea drastically. So
Hmm.
that put South Korean economy really, really in trouble because South Korea did not have anything on its own at that time, just almost purely depending on US aid. So that led to very brief democratization. But even after democratization, economy was really bad, and on top of that, there was no fear politics there because it's democracy. So it was very, very chaotic. If I read the history books, and then coup happened, and at least the coup was backed by military. So stability somehow came back in after that chaotic brief democracy. And then Park Chung-hee basically ruled the country for that 3 years purely under military junta. And then he
Hmm.
made a lot of law during that time. So law for stability. So I think for that initial very extreme military occupation, basically enabled stability came back and stop economy from exploding basically, and then
Hmm.
some of the corruption cuts were there. So that was done, and then afterwards probably South Korean government realized US aid is not coming back. uh, so
Hmm.
they changed the strategy. So two strategy were used by Park Chung-hee and South Korean government at the time was joining the Vietnam War
Yep.
and then get sort of different type of aid from the U.S. government
Hmm.
or other type of money from the United States, and also make a treaty with Japanese government. Japan colonized Korea for 36 years,
Right.
and then
Hmm.
not North Korean government, but South Korean government agreed to have a treaty with Japan, sort of let go that past, but having a lot of grant and also loan from Japan that can be a sort of big push money for South Korea. So 60s South Korea finally got this big push for economic growth. And then that was spent to build some of the very fundamental infrastructure. So the main highway in Korea that connects Seoul, which is the capital city, and the Busan, which is largest port in Korea, that was built using that initial money, and also POSCO, which has been the largest steel company in Korea, that was probably largest in the world in the 90s. So that company was also built using this grant and aid, and the money that South Korean soldiers earn in Vietnam. So that was the strategy in 60s and 70s. After the auto coup, Park Chung-hee sort of did more all-around developmental policy. So it's not just few infrastructure or a few industry. And then there were a lot of light industries developing in the 60s. We should push this to higher level industrialization. So he put and the government put a lot of investment in chemical industry or a lot of heavy industries that could also use for military purposes
Right.
when needed. So that was 70s. And then and then during that time, because the investment was channeled through the government and it was very selective, that gives rise to big conglomerates, what's
Right.
called chaebol,
Yep.
in Korea. So these companies also had, sort of partnership, political economic partnership with the government, and then lead the Korean development during those times. And after democratization, although the government and the political system has changed, the economic structure didn't change a lot.
Mhm.
It was really 1997 when the global financial crisis hit Korea that led some reconstruction of some of the Jabber companies. Some Jabber companies actually collapsed and disappeared. I don't know whether you remember Daewoo.
Uh-huh.
Daewoo was one of
Yep.
the largest Korean companies, which
Yep.
basically ended slowly,
Hmm.
disappeared
Hmm.
after the economic crisis. So afterwards was basically Korea is still very much Chaebol driven country, but some of these Chaebols became international. So Samsung,
Yep.
LG.
Yeah.
Um, So a lot of people initially thought Jeber should be reconstructed, and then like there should be more reform against Jeber. But now, as Korea compete in the global economy, and it seems like even these companies are not big enough compared to Apple. So a lot of sort of nationalism kicked in as well. So that Jeber reform became less of the uh, big topic issues anymore.
Well, Gian, it sounds like that my assumption was wrong because I assumed
Hmm.
that behind a lot of the divisions now, like before, was linked to what I know in the past during that Chaebol era was absurd economic inequality in Korea, and the way the United States is moving now. If you look at the images from the inauguration, this
Hmm.
fusion of the super rich with the government, which my understanding lasted even into the period of democracy. The movie Parasite certainly documents the inequality really well.
Right.
And so my assumption was this president and the conservatives were trying to milk the system and sort of get back towards that. But it sounds like
Hmm.
I'm wrong about that. Like, is that not what was behind this current
So I think
government?
about Tebar and Korean economy, there were much more of that debate and angle a few years back.
Hmm.
I think it's just hard now because these
Well, that's what
jabbers.
happened with Park, right? That's why that was her corruption that got her
Right,
impeached.
right, right.
I
With
figured that was
Samsung.
still continuing. I guess not, though. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no. Korean economy right now is just bad, and it seems like Samsung also struggle a bit in terms of adjusting next generations of technology.
Mm,
So, like Korean, at least if you look at if you watch the financial newses or economic newses, they all say, when does Nvidia ever adopt Samsung's semiconductor?
uh,
So apparently there is still technology to catch up, and I think people sort of think, oh, this is not the time to demand reform to Samsung. And Samsung itself has like about 25% of the GDP it produces
yeah.
on its own. So it's huge. So some people say it's too big to
Too big to
uh,
fail. I
yes, exactly,
don't
exactly.
like
So
that
every
expression.
family, yeah, mine as well has at least one or two people working in Samsung.
Mhm.
So I think it's under the water, I would say,
Okay.
but it can come out anytime.
Well, then, can you tell us what happened a couple weeks ago? Why did
Yeah,
the president declare martial law, uh, and and what happened?
yeah, and
Uh,
maybe just even
To the best
walk
of
us
your
through
ability to unpack.
walk
right.
us through what he did, not just why, and we just want to
Yeah,
make sure to catch everyone up on the
yeah.
past few weeks of
Thank
news,
you.
or if there's probably more that led up to this that the
Yeah.
U.S. news isn't showing us. So if you can kind of
Sure.
walk us through the lead up to the current crisis, that'd be great.
Sure, sure. So, wow, it's been already almost 50 days. So
Yeah.
this December 3rd, 2024, um, around 10:30 p.m. Korea time, out of blue,
Mhm.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol suddenly declared emergency martial law. And then last time when it was declared was 1979. And then it
Mhm.
lasted until mid 1980, which
Mhm.
covers the Gwangju massacre period as
Yep.
well. So massacre was under that emergency martial law at the time. So it's been almost 40, no, over 40 years since
Yep.
that last martial law. So all the Koreans were very much puzzled. Yet people, the lawmakers at least know the procedure. So they were, and then what's good thing about Korea is they all overwork. So apparently a lot of lawmakers were very nearby Korean capital. So they were very quick.
Another difference with America.
They're very quick coming back to the building. And at the same time, overworking staff of the National Assembly was inside the building. So
Yeah.
they were the ones who's blocking armed military people. The military was dispatched to the National Assembly building after the declaration, and then these staffs, who's not basically unarmed, they were the ones who's blocking um, the
Hmm.
door, and then put the furnitures at the door so the military couldn't come.
Hmm.
So later, military had to break the window to come in, and a lot of people say many of these staffs were actually student activists in the
Hmm.
1980s, so they know how to fight armed policies and then military policies at the time. So they sort of their skill suddenly after 40 years kicked back in that scene, and then citizens also gathered around
Yeah.
the National Assembly building, thousands of them, and then they basically blocked the martial law military with their bare hands. What meanwhile, lawmakers who came to back to the building, that includes some of the ruling party lawmakers as well, they revoked the martial law after 2.5 hours.
Unanimously.
Yes, those not everyone could come into the building because
Right.
they were blocked, or some of them were told some of the ruling party members were told to go to their party building, but many of them also came to the National Assembly building. So those who were in the building, 190 out of 300 rule makers, they unanimously voted against the martial law. So that
So,
was the night.
But
Yes.
why did he do it? Like what?
right.
What
It,
provoked
it, it's interesting. These things usually aren't such a surprise to
him? Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
we know now what led up to it, or is it still something of a mystery?
So he was in. It's a good question. I still have personally a hard time understanding the psychology of
Yeah.
it. I'll
Yeah.
try to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll do my best. Put my so political structure was not on his side for sure. So he was elected as president, but the margin of his election was 0.7%. So very small margin. So from the beginning, he was very his support was not the strongest one, I would say, or the weakest among any Korean democratically elected president. Yet he was, as I mentioned, leaning more toward to far right argument ideology. So that reduces the support base even further. That
Mm,
led to um, what we call national election, but it's a legislative election, parliamentary
Mhm.
election. So Korea has election system that's very different from US.
Yeah.
So Korean president have 5-year term. So it's a single term. There is no reelection, and then the lawmakers can be reelected, but it's every 4 years. So
Mhm.
the sort of cycle of these elections, every 20 years it overlaps, but meanwhile it's like very random. So
Mm.
for him, 2 years into his term, so he still have 3 years to go, there was a parliamentary election which he lost really bad. His party
Mhm.
lost very, very badly.
Mhm.
So the opposition party have basically, if you collect all the opposition parties, that's
Mhm.
192 seats out of 300. So if
Mhm.
8 people in his party decide to go the other way, basically he anything can pass with
Mhm.
supermajority. Not only the majority,
Yeah.
then his veto power is can be nothing,
Yeah.
right? So that was very, I think, put a lot of pressure on him. And the opposition party also played very strong strategies against the president. So opposition party impeached a lot of major bureaucratic positions, and there were a lot of laws that president vetoed, and then the opposition party
Yeah.
sort of put the same law again and veto again. So I think he vetoed more than 20 laws during that 2 years, and then it was uh, accelerating after that parliamentary election. So that put one thing.
Oh, wait
And
a
then
minute. Can I interrupt?
sure.
I want to make sure I get this right. So he gets elected president,
Hmm.
and he had a tiny majority.
Right.
And then
No,
two
this
years
didn't
later,
happen. Right, right,
well,
right.
he
You're
won with a
right.
tiny majority of the vote.
Right, 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 right. True. Yeah.
And then 2 years later, there's parliamentary elections,
Right.
and his party gets slaughtered.
Right.
Slaughtered so much that the opposition can pass veto-proof supermajority legislation.
That didn't
And
happen, but it
so
was.
he says, screw this. I'm imposing martial law and taking over.
Well, I shouldn't laugh, but there was one more thing.
Okay, it was a little bit fun.
Let me make things worse. So he got to think.
I thought you were going to say in 2 years that's going to happen here. The Democrats will have a supermajority of Congress, and then Trump's going to try. No, sorry.
Let me make the scenario even worse. So
Okay.
he got to think why we lost this election this badly, the parliamentary election this badly. Why did I win with that small margin? It seems like the evidence says he believed in election steal. So, election fraud. So the martial law night,
Imagine that.
there were a group of there were a group of martial law soldiers that were sent to National Assembly building, but even greater number of soldiers and military groups were sent to National Election Committee.
Oh, God.
Interesting.
He tried to find the evidence that election was frauded.
This
And
is one of those things that started in the United States, and really we're seeing it in a lot of places in the world. It's kind of the new reason
Yeah.
du jour. If you lose an election, you blame it on fraud, and you claim there's fraud on the other side. It's in so many places now.
it's very, very scary. It's very
Yeah,
scary. And then
Yeah.
the far right, the protests, if you go there, the sign they are holding is actually "Stop the Steal," which you will see in the United States. They hold it in English, literally. So
Ah.
yeah,
and then on the other hand, they hold the American flag because a Korean conservative has always
Mhm.
believed the
right,
U.S. Korean alliance is the sort of rescuer of the country.
right,
So they are holding the national U.S. Flag, and on the other hand, stop the steal sign. So this is very similar scene. You can imagine. And so yeah, so it's a lot of conspiracy. So I was when people were talking about this election fraud or election steal, like systematically frauded because National Election Committee is captured by the anti-state forces. I laughed at it as a political scientist, but
Yeah.
as time goes by, it becomes something that we cannot just laugh at it, right? Because a lot of people seem to talk about it and then argue, demand the evidence, but how can you prove something that didn't happen?
Right.
right.
So yeah, so there is
Yeah,
something.
and that leads to situations like this. And Korea, I think, got lucky and dodged a bullet this time. That the people were there and that they were able to close it down pretty quickly, very quickly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
actually.
Were there protests against the martial law outside of Seoul, or was it pretty much just in the capital?
So capital is really important protest scene because if you include greater capital, it's
Mm.
50% of the population live
Yeah.
around capital. But there were a
Mhm.
lot of protests against martial law outside Seoul. Major cities basically had it. And then if you see the polling, like at some point, I think 90%, over 90% of the population were against the martial law.
So
But
even those who vote conservative for the Conservative Party were against it.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, can you maybe walk us through a little bit? We got off track after the martial law was declared, and there were,
All right.
the parliament votes on uh, changing martial law, reversing martial law. What happened after that, and what led up to the impeachment over the past few weeks?
So, impeachment initially failed in the National Assembly because the ruling party, Conservative Party, People Action Party, their actual name is the People Action Party. Um, initially vote against the or didn't participate
Right.
in the impeachment vote. And then their reason was because what they experienced in 2017, the impeachment was possible because at that time the Party was split into two. So there were more extreme right, or I wouldn't say far right at the time, but more royal conservative group, and then there were more reformative conservative group. Um, and the party struggled as a political party a bit because of this split. And then this time they were determined not to split. And then because they were even smaller than that at the
Yeah.
time, so that time they were big, so splitting they could survive, but this time we're too small to survive after splitting. So there were a lot of disciplining inside the party to make the initial impeachment not work, but eventually the second voting it went through. So
Well, my understanding was they were hoping for a negotiated settlement, that he would step down and they wouldn't have to go through that. My reading of it was they weren't opposing it; they were just trying to delay to give him an opportunity to say, "Yeah, bye bye." But
right, but even that arrangement, the president was not
yeah,
cooperative.
right.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it wouldn't work, and it wasn't like constitutional wise or institution wise, it was not plausible, I
Oh,
would say. Yeah,
Yeah.
because constitution, there is no way president has to just step down. There's no way he can uh, give the power to someone else.
uh
Right.
huh, uh
So
huh.
that was questionable from the beginning. And
Yeah.
then
So has the president said anything other than stop the steal or given any justification or rationalization since all of this went down? Has he talked about it?
so he believed the National Assembly was captured by anti-state forces. So the
Yeah.
opposition party is basically North Korean collaborator. That's like what I meant by sort of ideology-driven
Right.
thinking. And then part of it is because he was a prosecutor before and then never participated in politics. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes politics is soulless compromise, and then that doesn't exist in prosecutorial world.
Right.
I
Yeah.
imagine. So it's all like guilty or not guilty, criminal or not criminal. So maybe he's in his worldview, the politics itself doesn't look clean enough. But so that was what he, and then after impeachment, he was leaning more strongly toward the still election still
Yeah.
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah.
And then he holed up in his residence with security preventing any action
Hmm.
against him, right?
Hmm.
Oh,
Hmm.
who were those people?
The
Was it
security.
private security or was it?
No, those were presidential security service people.
Oh, because he was
So,
impeached, but he had not yet been removed, right?
right. So Korean impeachment system is different from the United States, where the National Assembly votes for impeachment, and then it has to be confirmed by the Constitutional Court. And then that has in the past that has several months of gap. So it's the cases under in Constitutional Court. And then meanwhile, the president was under criminal case because the martial law
Yeah.
insurrection. So insurrection is the only the internal reason why he can be prosecuted under criminal law. And then that's basically what he did. So he was about to be arrested under that criminal law procedure,
Okay.
and the court agreed to arrest. The subpoena was there, but the security service was arguing that he is still incumbent president. He's
President.
not yet confirmed to be impeached, so we have a duty to protect him. That was their argument, which worked first time but didn't work second time.
That's
Really?
a messy situation because he's
It
still the
was.
sitting president. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is he still technically the president, or has he been removed from office yet? He's in
He
prison.
He is in prison, but he is still there's an interim president.
Okay.
But he is still, I would say, sitting president.
Isn't the Constitutional Court hearing it right now? Isn't that the stage
Yes,
that we're at? Okay.
yes, yes.
So it's
Okay.
not several months this time. They're moving really quickly.
Hopefully, but that
Oh,
is also that has political implication because that
yeah,
will make the presidential election being much earlier than planned.
yeah.
And the opposition party leader is also under several
Wow.
um, investigation and prosecution.
Don't
So,
tell me it involves a laptop computer.
no, not this
Oh,
time. Not
yeah.
him. Not him. But some of the cases, if he's confirmed um, and sentenced, he cannot run for presidential
Right.
election for the next
Okay.
10 years. So,
Interesting.
yeah,
So who serves
basically,
as interim president then?
the by the constitution, the prime minister at the
It's the
time
same
had to
party.
be the first this from he's not party member, but I
Oh,
think he shared the political view with
of
the president, but he was also impeached. um
course.
yes.
Oh,
Just a little
on
bit
the martial law thing, right? He was implicated in the martial law declaration, or
And
no?
he refused to
Who
appoint
was that?
the
Yeah,
constitutional court judges.
yeah.
So basically, that's why he was impeached.
A
Currently,
mess.
it's Ministry of Finance.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
that was
Minister
another
of
question I was going to ask that you just
Mhm.
touched upon a little bit. Is the Constitutional Court a politicized body in South Korea? Is it more of a seen as more of an objective justice body? How does that fit into the politics, or is it outside of the politics?
Well, yeah, I think so far they have been seen as judiciary in Korea in general has been seen as unpoliticized or should be unpoliticized body. Appointment of constitutional court judges has also arranged for that. So there were three members appointed by the president, three members appointed by the parliament, and then also three members appointed by the Supreme Court judge. So
Okay.
they try to balance that out, and
But it's not a standing body. Like they convene it when needed, or is it a
no, it's
standing?
standing body. There were a
Oh, it
lot
is.
of constitution-related
Okay.
cases. So not only impeachment, but also
Okay.
there is a interpretation of constitution or the law. Some of the law it might be against the constitution. Then that the decision will be are made by the constitutional court. And constitutional court judges are kind of similar to U.S. Supreme Court judges, seen as very prestigious, respectful judges in the country. Some of them, people argue, have political leanings, but their
It's
decision should
yeah,
be made by the Constitution only. And the
mhm,
Constitution is not too long. It's not
yeah, yeah.
um,
Yeah.
too complicated. So it has been seen as more objective body so far, but you cannot be sure.
And this impeachment process has worked in the past, right? Like
Right.
Korea is obviously under. So
Yeah.
he's currently before the Constitutional Court. That's strictly about the martial law declaration and his violation of the Constitution. He also faces the criminal charges, if I
Under
understand right,
insurrection.
correct?
Yes.
Under the insurrection law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Real quick, how long are the terms of the Constitutional Court judges?
Mm.
6 years. So
Okay.
that's longer than the presidential term. So
Okay.
some of
Yeah,
the
but
constitutional,
they are limited.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, some of the
Interesting.
constitutional court judges were appointed by the former president, who's from the opposition party. So it's very much mixture.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to take us in a slightly different direction because you've mentioned it a couple of times already. How much does North Korea come into current South Korean politics? Because at different times it's been an enormous issue, and then there's
Mhm.
questions sometimes of reconciliation between the two and of conflict between the two. How important is it now in the politics?
North Korea as a actual security threat, I would say it's always there. It has always been there. But I think what really threatens South Korean domestic politics has been this idea that some of the politicians or some of the major social forces are actually North Korean followers. This belief that
Mhm.
some of the extreme conservative members have. And what's added in recent period is it's not just only about North Korea, it's also about China.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is sort of circulating belief or rumor that the opposition party is anti-U.S., pro-China party, and there are Chinese spies working for the opposition party to win, or so these, and then there are so this like very hard to believe, absolutely no evidence,
Okay.
and then
I was going to ask, is there any facts behind it at all?
Yeah.
there
No.
were some activities like weird activities reported on the news about Chinese student. I think he like these were very random news that we saw, which could alert some of the security concerns, but it's very ungrounded to argue that like some of the populations are captured by
Right.
the South Chinese regime, communist regime, or they are followers of communism. But that is very much there because, as in other democratic countries, I think anti-China sentiment is definitely growing in Korea, especially among younger generations who were born and grew up in democracy. So the concern is there, but how that's politicized and used by politics has been also kept in this situation.
Well,
Okay.
that leads to the question I was going to ask. There was about a 5 minute period during the political turmoil
Mhm.
when commentators, both here in the U.S. and Korean, at least interviewees that I saw on
Mhm.
television, I think they were national security experts or officials, maybe from South Korea, concerned that North Korea would exploit the political turmoil domestically uh, to somehow gain whatever it was they were saying they would gain.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I would imagine, like, does that happen every time there's any political crisis in South Korea? That people are like, oh no, you can't do this because the North Koreans are going to come. The North is
There
going
is
to come.
always that rhetoric that
Yeah.
we when we're not united, basically that's the opportunity for North Korea to exploit and expand their nuclear plan and get more leverage. But right now, for North Korea to do that, there's no interaction between the two, between South and North. There has been no interaction to leverage on. So
Yeah.
I think North Korea right now is betting on the Trump administration, which
Okay.
Uh-huh.
there were some opportunities in the first one. So I'm sure that's what they probably are looking forward to rather than the political chaos that's unfolded in South Korea.
And somehow to exploit their sending of troops to Ukraine to extract something from Russia to their benefit. It's still a little unclear what they're hoping to get from Russia, but clearly they're not just saying,
True.
"Oh yeah, we'll just send our troops." Like there's got to be some kickback, and I'm guessing it's petroleum, but
Right.
who knows?
Right.
Yeah.
Possible.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Brian, do you want to take the traditional question? And I'm going to put
Well,
my helmet
I'm not
on.
sure. We normally ask if you could, what would you do? But I think in this case, maybe I'll just ask your opinion. Where do you think this is going to be in the next 6 months or a year? Where is South Korea headed? Is there likely to be some unity after this, or is this going to lead into more discord?
Uh,
Personal opinion.
personally, I hope, well, I hope we can sort of sever these like violent far right group
Yeah.
and sort of put them in like give them the consequences they need to face, because that was really going back to 50s when there were a lot of political violence in Korea. Like people were scared of political gangs attacking them, knowing who they voted for. I really hope that didn't repeat in South Korea. And then last Sunday, when these violent far right people attacked courthouse, and then they were actually searching for the judge who extended the detention of the president. They were calling her name. Some of them were calling her name in outside her office. Thank God she escaped from the courthouse before the
Yeah.
decision being made public. But otherwise, it would have been really terrifying
Yeah.
situation. So that should be, I think, gone
Mm.
in a proper democratic country. And then politically, I hope there are there there will be presidential election, highly likely. There, a lot of people expect the impeachment will be confirmed by the Constitutional Court, and then there will be election, and then people sort of, as democratic country, should be accept the results and wait for the next election to take
Yeah.
another action, right? Rather than becoming violent and then calling for stop the stealing.
Well, it
How,
Um,
seems
how does the law work? Will the next president finish the term if there's a new election, or will it be a full 5 year term?
so there's also, it will be full 5 year term
okay.
under the
Okay.
current constitution. But there's a lot of discussion about it's time to change the constitution.
Okay.
Some
Mhm.
people argue more of U.S. system where there is a midterm election, so that the presidential policy drive can be checked in ordinary times, and then there is a sort of election where the president and then parliament, the Congress also shuffle at the same time.
I hope
There is
people
a
rethink that. I mean,
okay.
imagine if that had been the case, what would have been in Parliament's reaction if that Conservative Party had been elected along with the president and they'd had a majority? Things could be very
Right.
different today. I think it's a brilliant system, and I hope people are wise enough to preserve it. It's a
Oh,
great check.
okay. That's very good to know. I also, there is a discussion about parliamentary system, but right now the current situation is too upsetting, too
Right.
chaotic. So
Yeah,
people find it hard to think about long term. So like 60
yeah.
months sounds very far away right
Right.
now.
In
Yeah,
the
I'm
middle of
worried
a
about
crisis, sure.
next week, tomorrow, another
Right.
hearing in the courthouse. Yes, so those are sort of occupying my mind. Um,
Mm,
but hopefully no more violence.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
That's a good wish.
yes.
I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. I think it seems clear that the people of South Korea have pretty loudly and resoundingly said no to authoritarianism and yes to preserving the democracy. I think
Mhm.
it's unfortunate that the American public has not learned that lesson and doesn't seem to. But it's also understandable why. The people of South Korea would cherish their democracy, and why those members of parliament and why those staff people that you referred to would respond as strongly as they did, because
Mhm,
they
mhm.
understand quite well the consequences of backsliding. So it's really encouraging in this time with democratic backsliding around the world to see the people of a country rising up and defending it. John,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time. I know you've
Thank you
got
very
two
much.
little kids who didn't go to school today who are probably bouncing off the walls. Thank you for helping us to understand what's happening in
Thank
Korea.
you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much
much.
for the opportunity.
Thank you to David for producing this, and thank you for listening. Please subscribe and like and share, and we'll see you next time on the World Discord podcast.
Bye, folks.